At this time of year, as autumn fades into winter and the preparations for Christmas begin, I like to set myself a drawing challenge, one that has absolutely nothing to do with work or my portfolio, but that encourages me to stop and relax and kind of enjoy the magic of this time of year. I love sitting down and watching other creators' Vlogmas videos. I have a chronic illness and my Decembers are much more quiet, and so this year I thought it might be nice in the lead up to Christmas to try and spend time, even if it's just 10 minutes a day, to draw some of my favourite Christmas activities. So even if I don't get to do them myself this year, I still have a way of enjoying them. I will include the list of prompts at the end of this video and also in the description in case you want to draw along. It'd be so nice to see other people's interpretations of the prompts. Today's prompt is reading a winter or Christmas themed novel, which is one of my favourite activities to do every year. I usually start in November and I like to read Christmas rom-coms, and each year I try to choose a classic that's based around Christmas. Last year I read A Christmas Carol for the first time, which is the book I've chosen to draw in today's prompt. I'm going to draw two little mice sat in a huge armchair in front of a very nice sparkly Christmas tree reading A Christmas Carol. I read it for the first time last year and I was so shocked by how funny and brilliant it is. I really owe Charles Dickens an apology because it's my first Dickens book that I've read and I really thought it would be much more serious, but it's so wonderfully close to A Muppet's Christmas Carol that I wouldn't find it as funny if I didn't have A Muppet's Christmas Carol playing in my head as I read it. But I found it so funny and so joyful and so unbelievably Christmassy. It was just, I think I might read it again this year because I had the best time. Because the point of doing this challenge in these illustrations is to be relaxing and restful, I'm going to try keep them all pretty simple and small and try and complete them within 1 or 2 sittings. When I sat down and wrote the list of prompts for this illustration, I really didn't have mice in my head, and none of the prompts are particularly mice themed anyway. But then when I sat down to do the initial sketches for each one, I could so clearly see the illustration in my head, and it was always a mouse, so I just didn't fight it. I think sometimes when you're in the mood to draw a certain thing and you very rarely get the opportunity to just run with that, so it's nice to have the freedom to do that here. Plus, mice are pretty Christmassy creatures when you think about it, I'd say. Now that I've finished my initial sketch, I'm just going through and blocking in all of the main shapes and colours before I add the textures. I've got a colour study up in the left hand corner just to use as reference so I know which colours I should be using as I go along. This is my favourite way to work because even though doing an initial sketch and a colour study takes a little longer in the planning stage, when I sit down to do the final piece, it's like having my own personal colouring book because I've already made all of the hard decisions, so I can just really sit back and enjoy the process. The Christmas tree is the bit I'm most excited for because I don't really get the opportunity to draw them for work, and it makes me feel like I'm back in primary school when we used to get to do festive art projects at the end of the year and bring them home for our parents. Maybe I should turn this into a Christmas card for my mum actually. I think she'd really like that. She tries to make us Christmas cards every year. She's really good at it. I read an article recently about how people are sending less and less Christmas cards, which I understand because postage is quite expensive now. We send them to our neighbours and close family, we don't mail any out, but it's still a little sad thinking about them not being sent. My parents are both teachers, so luckily we get lots and lots from all of their students, and one of my favourite things is seeing them all strung up in the hallway, and then after Christmas I really like to use them for collages and scrapbooking. I love all of the colours and seeing the different designs, and some of them are really funny. I actually started out my illustration career as a greetings card designer, so maybe I'm a little bit biased in favour of Christmas cards, but I really hope they don't get lost over the next few years. I think it's such a lovely tradition. And you know what, as I'm just blabbering on about Christmas cards, I've just realised the first commercially available Christmas card, which was commissioned by Sir Henry Cole, was in 1843, which is the same year that Dickens published A Christmas Carol. So this is doubly perfect as a Christmas card. I'll have to do it. Anyway, I'll stop yapping about Christmas cards now, I'm so sorry. So in my last illustration, I really wanted to add some gingham, but then I ran out of layers on Procreate, so I had to do a check instead. So today we're definitely doing gingham. I've done all of my vertical stripes on one layer and set that layer to screen and then reduced the opacity to about 30%. And then I've added a second layer on top, all the same settings, but this time I'm adding horizontal layers. It's really important to do them as separate layers so that the opacity is doubled at any point in which the lines overlap to give the gingham effect. You could potentially do it on one layer by reducing the opacity of the pen rather than the layer, and you get the same effect, but it would be harder to make any adjustments if you needed to. You can also get a gingham look by setting the background to a paler shade of the colour you want, and then each of the layers to multiply, like I've done in the border of this video with red, but for the chair I wanted to keep it a bit more monotone and simple, and using screen instead of multiply allowed the colours that I've chosen for the mice to stand out much better. God, my hands were absolutely killing after doing this though. At first I was going to do the mice each wearing different coloured pyjamas, but I scrapped that because one of the best parts of Christmas is it's the one time of year where everyone in the family, including the dog, all wears matching pyjamas, so they had to be matching too. And I've actually based these pyjamas on my favourite Christmas pyjamas, so now we all get to match and it's perfect. I know it's silly to be worrying about any sort of factual accuracy when I'm drawing two mice wearing Christmas pyjamas and reading a book, but still, unfortunately the first edition of A Christmas Carol wasn't green, it was like browny red, so I've had to take some artistic liberties to make sure that it matches the rest of the illustration. But I don't think Charles Dickens would be too upset because he did originally want bright festive green end papers for the book, but when it was first printed it came out like an ugly olive colour, so they ended up changing them to yellow and the title page being in blue and red instead before it was wrapped in red cloth with gilt edged pages, which sounds so beautiful. A Christmas Carol wasn't Charles Dickens' first Christmas story. He'd written a couple before, including one which was really similar to A Christmas Carol, except instead of ghosts, the man was visited by goblins, which I don't know if that sounds better or worse than ghosts. I really love the Victorian obsession with ghosts though. If you ever have a moment to look into Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's obsession with the paranormal and with ghosts, it's such an interesting history. I think it's so wild that Charles Dickens began working on A Christmas Carol in October and finished it in just 6 weeks. He wrote a lot of it in his head when he'd go on a 15 to 20 mile walk around London at night just to think, and then when it came to publication he actually self-published because he couldn't get his publishers to agree on a sum large enough, and he was struggling quite a lot with money at this point. It was published in 1843 on December 19th, and by Christmas Eve all 6,000 copies of the first edition had been sold, and it's never been out of print since. For the design of the cover, I'm just illustrating the lettering over on the Christmas tree because it's the same colour as the book and it gives me a larger space to work on, and it also allows me to write the words straight on instead of trying to match the angle that the page is being held by the little mouse's hand. I've also got the drawing guide turned on for this layer and set to grid so that I know where each letter should start and finish, and that each should be 2 squares high and 1 square across. And then once I'm finished, I'm just going to copy and paste the layer and distort it so that it fits the shape of the front of the book. I've copied the layer rather than distorting the original layer, just because when I'm using the distort tool sometimes I mess up a bit, and in Procreate the more you resize and adjust a layer the worse the quality gets and it can become quite obviously pixelated, so it's always nice just to have that original layer safe and as a backup if you needed. Obviously you can always just use the undo tool, but sometimes things go wrong and that tool freezes, so I always like just to have a backup just to be on the safe side so that if I need to go back to the original design it's just there and it's easy to fix rather than trying to undistort a layer. Now that the book is finished, the next step is to add some shadows to the mice and then add details to the pyjamas. Compared to Charles Dickens, it's actually quite difficult to do research on mice because all of the information online comes from websites that specialise in pest control, so they're not always the biggest fans, and finding lovely fun facts from those type of people is quite difficult. But what I have learned is that mice don't hibernate and that they are excellent at foraging and finding cosy little nooks to cuddle up in during the winter. Every single year at Christmas, my nan gets a mouse in her house and she's never successfully caught her, and she's really not the biggest fan, but we love her. We call her Linda, and it's nice to have that constant in our life. For the pyjamas, I'm going to use the exact same technique that I used on the armchair of using overlapping screen layers with the opacity turned down to around 30% to create a really nice gingham effect, because I think it's such a cozy look for winter pyjamas. I'm currently wearing these exact same pyjamas while sat on my red gingham bedding, and I'm camouflaged in so well no one would be able to pick me out. My Christmas pyjamas for this year are so fun. I couldn't believe it when I found them. They have little mice on them. They're so perfect. I think I might have to wear them to draw one of these illustrations because they are unbelievably on theme for this year. Now that all the lines have been added to the pyjamas, I'm just flattening those two layers onto one so that I can erase the lines from the cuffs of the pyjama pants and the pyjama sleeves, and then add some stitching details. I accidentally did them in the wrong place on one of the mouse's arms, but don't worry, I do go back and fix that later. I'm so sorry if that annoys anyone. For the Christmas tree, I'm using the selection tool to draw each of the sections of branches, starting from the top and working all of the way down, doing each section on a separate layer and setting all of the layers to screen. For the very top layer, I tried colouring in the section first and then using a large texture brush to erase some of the colour so that it wasn't just a solid block. But for the rest of the sections, it worked best to just use the texture brush itself to lightly colour in each of the selected areas, being careful not to press too hard or go over areas too much. I'm using a brush that I purchased called Nebula Glaze to do this, but you could achieve the exact same look with Procreate spray paint brush. I'd use a medium nozzle if you want more of a texture brush, or an ultra fine nozzle if you wanted to have more of a smooth finish. And then just to add some dimension, I'm using the dry ink brush to add some individual branches as shadows, setting that layer to multiplier and popping it beneath the screen layers that we've just created. And then it was time for the fairy lights, which are another Victorian invention. I did not set out to make this entire illustration about the Victorians, but here we are, and they are undoubtedly the best part of a Christmas tree. I can't pronounce the name of the texture brush I'm currently using, but it's a free Procreate brush, and I'll have it listed in the description along with all of the other brushes that I'm using. I'm using the larger texture brush first to add like bursts of light, and then the smaller dry ink brush to add smaller, more contained dots of light in between to give the impression of twinkling lights. I was tempted to do retro multicoloured lights because they're my personal favourite type of Christmas lights, but I thought it might draw too much attention from the little mice, so I kept it as simple as possible with just the clear ones. And now that the tree is all finished, it's finally time to add some little faces to the mice. I'm still using the dry ink brush, and I'm using a dark brown for their eyes and their mouth, and then a soft pink for their ears and their nose, and a little bit of a lighter brown to add some fur details, and turning that opacity all the way down so it's not as scary as a contrast, but it still gives some texture. I saw some really wonderful news earlier this month that a hazel dormouse has been found in a new area of Wales, which is really incredible news because it shows that the mice there are now able to spread about a little bit more rather than being in small isolated populations that were previously known. The species has declined by about 70% in Britain since the 2000s, but this is a really wonderful sign that that could be changing hopefully over the next few years. Always make sure to leave your hedgerows or small bits of garden as wild as you can to help small animals like that to have somewhere safe to burrow and to have food to forage for. I wasn't sure whether to leave the background blank, but I thought some nice pink wallpaper would be a good little touch just to wrap everything together, and I think it looks really sweet. I changed the mice's cheeks to a rosy red because for some reason the pink was just bothering me, and then I added a little bit of detail to the flooring before moving on to the plant pot at the base of the tree and the presents. I added a screen layer on top of the plant pot and then used the dry ink brush to add some vertical lines and some stars so that it matches the Christmas tree. After that, I added some wood grain details to the floorboards as well as the chair legs, and then some final shadow details before adding the presents under the tree. I tried a green ribbon at first, but the pink ribbon won, and after adding some final star details to the wrapping paper, the illustration was all finished. Thank you so much for drawing with me today. It was so much fun and I'm so excited to turn this into a Christmas card and then go sit in front of our Christmas tree and read a Christmas book. If you liked today's video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. I will pop a list of all the Christmas drawing challenge prompts in the description, as well as links to my social media and my Etsy shop if you would like to support my art. As always, all of the brushes I used in today will be listed below too. I hope you have a wonderful start to winter and I will see you in the next video.